Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. But I personally don't have people start mixing hybrid programs until they're 10 because of multiple reasons. It's not because of stunting growth. It's not because of injuries. It's more mental acuity to be able to do these things safely, and it's time, right? Like I think in the younger levels, and we'll talk about this later, is that it's more about getting the bare basics of gymnastic shaping and stuff done. You don't have 9-10 hours extra on top of a 10-hour technical program to do this, but there's benefits all the way down to that level, and people are starting to do that, which is great. But the one criticism I always get, because I don't work with elite level athletes, is like, how do you know? You've never worked with level 10s going to nationals. You've never worked with junior Olympians or stuff like that, or juniors or seniors going to worlds. And so, Nick, I just want to ask your perspective, I guess, first is like, is this something that you see is either changing or a lot of teams are using at the higher level? Or is this still something that you feel as though like it needs to make its way into that upper level? Because I know a lot of people are going to be like, okay, sounds cool, but like if you haven't coached an Olympian to the Olympics, then like how do you know what you're talking about?
Well, the athletes that I've worked with at Olympic level, and not to blow my own trumpet, but I've worked, as you know, with over 20 federations. That's a lot of Olympic athletes, and you know, they're almost all doing a hybrid model. You know, some programs are really intensely using it, you know, multiple times a week. Others are kind of scratching the surface at the minute, but the trend is that definitely it's moving in that direction. And in particular, for those athletes that I've worked with more closely and had a greater impact with, they wouldn't have had the results they did without strength and conditioning support, because they wouldn't have physically been able to deliver what they needed to do. Now that might either be because the skill avenues or the skill opportunities wouldn't have been opened up for them because they weren't strong enough, or it could have been that actually not being strong enough would have resulted in them being injured prior to getting to the, you know, these big events. And you know, they might be thinking, well, Nick, you've not got a crystal ball, you don't know that. Of course, that, you know, but that is a pretty educated, I'm not going to say even guess, it's an educated response there, that there are some athletes that you watch them perform and you think if you're not going to get S&C support, you will be injured in the next 2-3 years. It's kind of a given. And that's obviously what we're trying to mitigate here.
Why would you start your week initially hard and get a load of fatigue in, and then for the rest of the week have to manage that? And, you know, the idea is they come to training to get better. Well, what I can guarantee, one thing that they're not going to do is if you really overload that day one and they're fatigued, your next two training days are going to be full of frustration, because speed will be low, takeoff height, jump height will be low. And those are all things that like you're going to have to be dealing with, because their body just literally won't have the energy, and it'll have the fatigue within it from one day's worth of training on a Monday to sort of deal with and go through. Like you said, once you spike that load on day one, then you have to sort of try and carry and manage that the remainder of your week, because you've got to manage your week as opposed to manage your days.
Yep.
So if you mismanage one day, the rest of your week, you've got to really start to chop and change what you're doing, as opposed to sticking to the plan and trying to have it as more of a fluid process.
Yeah. And another really important thing to mention from the workload research and what we've studied and many other people have studied is these cranky joints, these sorenesses, these decreases in performance don't show up the day of training or the day after training. They're delayed onsets. So we know from some research in the global workload that these non-contact soft tissue injuries, which are just like cranky joints, you strain your hamstring, those come like 1 to 2 weeks later after the spike in training workload. They don't come during the week. So people falsely attribute it to something happening 3 weeks later when it's actually what happened 2 weeks prior. And so that's one thing, but that happens in a training week as well too. Like your delayed effect and your fatigue, if you crush somebody on a Monday, doesn't show up on Monday. It shows up on Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, when you're like, what is going on? Why? Like, you didn't sleep last night. It's like, no, I'm just dead from Monday. And we like went really, really hard. And so I'm just barely hanging on. And you see a lot of kids, not in the off season, but in season, when they don't have that concept, they tank their meat on a Friday, Saturday because of the training load on a Monday, Tuesday, hanging over and carrying through the end of the week. So enough banter, but that's a really important point to bring up. Point of view. So in the first one up here, why would you pick 8 reps versus 3 reps or 15 reps? Like, why is 8 what you're going with?
I think you don't want to play your trump card too early. So although she is an older gymnast in the sense of like 13 to 16, there is so much more to come. So for me, if I start to play that very potent card of doing 3 very, very heavy reps very early on, I just think we've missed out so much more progression we could have made by doing, you know, 8s and 6s and 10s. And that doesn't mean that those aren't difficult, because it's 8 reps compared to the 3. you know, we're going to progressively load it over the weeks, and we're looking for like a progressive overload principle. So we're just trying to lift a little bit more than we did the week before.
Yep.
And then by the end of that 6 weeks, we've already loaded up a little bit more.
I totally love that. And then something I've learned from you too is playing on those 3 or 15s or extremes. And like to get an effect at 3 reps, you got to go heavy. And like you said, you're going to not be able to really go more. And it's kind of dicey when you're putting a really heavy 3 load on a younger athlete. Like 13 is really young to 15 is young, but same thing with 15 too. By reps 11, 12, it starts to look like not great. You know, you start to be like, oh, his knees aren't tracking great. So like 8 seems to be a perfect, like you can get a training effect, you can add more load, you can progress it, but it's not going to ever fall apart in front of you. So I like that. I love that already. But why would you say this with that lower back arching down here? Why are you giving someone a 90-second rest versus a 2-minute rest? Is there a reason for that? Or is it more based on what you think it's going to take time-wise to get through these?
There's an element of both. So that's like the coaching side of it is there is a time period we have to get through. I would prefer that they have their rest for the things that are more neuromuscularly demanding. So the things that are going to stress them out a lot more, which is trying to push against resistance with maximal intent. And I also think there's an element of we want them to be working hard as well. Yep. So I love my athletes leaving the session being like, whew, crushed it, worked hard, where you don't always get that similar feeling. You've definitely worked hard when you've done strength training, but it sort of catches up with you later in the day, as opposed to that sort of, that was difficult and I've been challenged and I've been successful at the end of that.
Yep. Love it, man. I absolutely love it. And my little 2 cents. I love it. Yeah. The only question I have here is you like a lot of stuff in the goblet position. So it seems like you have goblet squat, goblet split squat. Why would you do a goblet split squat or versus a dumbbell by your sides? You know, maybe just holding the weights in a suitcase or a farmer carry. What's your thought about goblet versus side holds?
I like that you actually have to have some posterior postural control. Yep. So when you hold a weight on here, like I said with the band, it's always trying to pull you into, like I sort of explained to the gymnasts I work as an ugly position, where you have to actually brace and stack everything above that in order to create some shapes. And that is just like an added bonus to the exercise that you're doing. So are we creating some lower body strength? Tick. Can we get anything else out of it? Some postural strength. Like if I ask Nick, would you like some postural strength in your Gymnast too? He'll probably be like, yes, please. We'll throw like that in a goblet position. But that isn't me saying that there's anything wrong with, if that weight gets super heavy and they can't posturally control it, we start to load it down the leg, because the primary emphasis is to get a strong lower body on that exercise. Yeah.
I love that. And we do that all the time. We start with goblets for that postural control and stuff. But week 3, week 4, when it starts to get, we're pushing it, especially in the second week cycle. If we're starting to get the second month cycle, we'll have the kids take two heavier dumbbells by their sides, because they can definitely carry more than they can hold in the front rack position or in the goblet squat. So you can change that on the fly. I love that though. I'm glad you explained that.
I agree with you. Like you can load it on the back, load it on the front, load it back the side, just wherever you think it then is more suitable to get the adaptation you're after.
Because this is an error of mine that I've made, and I still see all across the world, honestly, in all levels, is 20 minutes of a bunch of panel mats, and their kids are just like flopping through. You know, it looks like a bunch of upstream salmon sometimes by the end of the 20 minutes. It's very hard. The body alignment's not great. The intensity is real low. I used to do that as gold standard, as I thought that was my plyo circuit, and it was great, or cardio as well. Can you share maybe why you differ from that? And if you do it, how do you adjust it so it's not, you know, just a bunch of people going through this long line of plyos down the floor?
Yeah. So first of all, we've got to remember that a lot of gymnastics is already plyometric. So whilst the athletes are running down the vault run, hitting a springboard, blocking off the vault with their arms, because obviously plyos is not just lower limb, but it's upper limb as well for us. When they are taking off on beam, when they're on the tumbling, well, you know, when they're tumbling on the floor, they're doing a round off back handspring, like all of that should already be plyometric. So you've got to look at it and say, well, where's the value in doing another 20-minute session on poor quality plyo, which is what you're going to get from 20 minutes, when you've got this massive accumulated amount of plyometric training that they're already doing. So instead, I'm looking at it and going, well, what do they not get from gymnastics plyo that I need to get here in this kind of dedicated session? And that might be an enhancement of quality potentially. So a real emphasis on, this is going to be the activity and we're absolutely going to focus on, you know, exactly what your ankle's doing. Or perhaps it's just that understanding of stiffness, which is the body's ability to be more rigid in the surface that it's rebounding on. or contacting. It might be that actually you want to challenge them plyometrically at a greater level than what they do when they're doing their gymnastics. So maybe Sally, when she tumbles, she's not actually really getting, because her technique is so poor, for example, she might not take off and get maximum amplitude from the floor. She might not strike the floor with stiff knees and stiff hip and stiff back. So she might actually be jumping there. So when we're doing the plyometric session, which is emphasized with quality, and we give her a block to jump over, and the constraint of you're only allowed to get over that block using a certain technique, we're then forcing her to become plyometric. And that's totally different to what we would be seeing when she's doing a double back on the track or a double twist or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that makes sense there, that we don't want to just add more plyo into the mix. It's like, no, let's separate this and think, well, what do they not get from their gymnastics typically?
So, Nick, any thoughts on the 3-day?
No, just I think the 3 and the 5 day, one thing that I probably missed out was just the emphasis on the core. Like, I would really want to be making sure that I'm doing specific core every single training day again. So Dan's obviously got some specific things like the electnas and things, and the static holds, which are all amazing exercises, but we've got to have in there hollow work, the arch work, some compression, because I don't think there's any compression in there at the minute. So by compression, I mean when the gymnast is folding, which we're going to see obviously in a leg lift activity. So just making sure that with the 3 and the 5 day week, we're weaving in core every single day. Core is not just the abdominals, of course. It's going to be that whole central pillar which supports upper and lower body. So posterior, anterior, oblique, sides, lateral movements, all of that stuff is going to be super important to integrate in there.
Yeah.
I think it's a case of you've got the tools there, and just like you said at the beginning, is don't just copy and paste it, but try and take the concepts and the principles from it and apply it to your environment and how it's going to work in your gym and the age of the athletes you have and all of those things. But it's just a case of it takes 6 weeks for this to happen, and we don't race to week number 6. We take our time and we plan it through, and that's probably the biggest take home for me, apart from obviously the fact that we've all had a conversation here and we've all agreed with each other, and we all have different roles to play within gymnastics.
Yep.
And that's how these conversations should be. Doesn't mean that you don't have your disagreements, absolutely not, but I think it's that you're building and you're feeding off what the other person is doing, and you're trying to actually, it's not like a gymnast centered approach. It's all to do with how do we impact Sally's training the best. Not like I want my piece of the pie, I want my bit of this. It was very like holistic, and we all tried to get there together.
Love it.